Okay, today is Wednesday, 23rd of June, 2011. Time is 1:20 p.m. And the place is Dumplings Legend on Chinatown. I am Yap Wan Ho, the interviewer on behalf of the British Chinese Food Culture Project, and I'll be interviewing Mr. Geoffrey Leong, the executive owner of Leong's Legend. For the record of the archive, would you mind spelling out your name?
Yes, my name is Geoffrey Leong, spelled Geoffrey
Thank you. Could you tell us a little bit about what and when brought you to the UK?
First and foremost, when I first arrived in London was coming over for the education. As a family, all of us all came over here, and I started my journey going to boarding school and continued the education in England.
How old were you then?
I came over when I was 10 years old, and we settled in London. And the first school we went to was in Rugby, and so had my education living in a boarding school environment in north of London, which is in Warwickshire, so slightly outside, but not too far away.
Yeah, so did you have any chance to try some Chinese food when you first arrived at age 10?
I think when in boarding school environment, there was no restaurants in the sense you could go and enjoy. But I do remember when I was young, during the weekends when we enjoyed going to friends' house, families of friends used to bring me to a Chinese restaurant. And I do remember my first prep school, Heath Mount. I was the only Chinese person in the whole entire school. So of course, I understand I was quite interesting of people to find out more about our culture.
And what did you tell them about your Chinese culture at school?
Oh, it's really interesting. Of course, the language, first of all, my English wasn't very good, and over the years, it's actually very good to be able to go to school surrounded by not Chinese people. So you actually get to use the language, and that was one of the key kind of environment that I enjoyed.
So even at age 10, did you want to show the Chinese culture to your English school friends by showing them what food you ate?
I think the first thing, yes, there was definitely an element of, there was of course a lot of the fast food that I remember having, so the likes of noodles. And I do remember the first thing that we did come across was the difference between the English version of pot noodles and the Chinese version of these dole noodles, which are far superior in taste. And I think one of the introduction I gave to many of my friends is teaching them, actually not teaching, but also making it as a business to teach them Chinese language. So one of the first things I enjoyed was teaching friends or school kids below us during the weekends in the boarding school, learning some simple Chinese.
You mean the instructions of how to make dole noodles?
Well, that was one of the latter on part of the development.
Yeah. So what was your impression of English food when you first arrived?
Oh, I actually embraced it. You have to realize going to a boarding school environment, and there's actually, you're very much structured that there's no choice. Every day you have to eat the dish that they provide, and you have to really enjoy and eat and really enjoy what you're seeing. And I think the first impression, there was a lot of unique dishes that I've never come across, and it was definitely enlightenment to try new things. And I've really enjoyed all the dishes. And I do remember during those periods, you can't leave the dining room unless you finished all your food. And there are dishes that people just didn't like, and I go, wow, this is interesting. So I guess it's a new discovery for myself.
And so did you miss Chinese food at all during your period at boarding school?
Well, I think you do miss Chinese food, and that's part of my memoirs of Chinese food when we were in Hong Kong coming over here. And of course, I, like most kids and fans, would miss it dearly.
What did you miss in particular?
Yeah, one of the things I do miss is probably not more about the food, but the union of friends and family. Because my memories of, say, going to Chinese food would be going to banqueting style Chinese food, where the kids would have their own table with their friends and the cousins, and the parents would be miles away in some other tables. And so it's a very enjoyable experience to just sit there and eat and enjoy yourself and talk to friends and family.
Do you have a favorite Chinese dish?
I think it's very hard for me to pinpoint specific dishes that I enjoy now, but there has been a journey of dishes that I've discovered over the years, which I would have known, say, 3 years ago. And so there's a number of different dishes that I've enjoyed and embraced it as part of my journey of discovering Chinese food.
Would you be able to give us a quick snapshot of some of your favourite Chinese food throughout the years?
I think, yes, recently I've been to enjoy the Sichuanese cooking. And so in the restaurant with the Empress of Sichuan, we looked at a lot of the interesting cold dishes. So the cold starters, the pig ears, the cartilage, really talking about the Chinese love of texture food. And the fact that because it's cold, you get to really taste the flavors of the dishes. And that is one thing that a lot of people misunderstand. When you eat hot food, your tongue is actually camouflaging a lot of the flavors because it's sensing heat. And that was one of the new discovery for me, to discover Sichuanese food, discovering Sichuanese pepper, the effect it has to your tongue, the numbing taste. It's the first time I drank water, I was go, wow, this tastes like soup. It doesn't taste like water. And it's amazing, the interplay to you. And of course, prior to that, a couple of years earlier on, I discovered lots of the fascinating Taiwanese culture and eating dishes like the 3-cup chicken and realizing that a lot of the combination of the so-called oradin, which is similar to a Western version of an omelette with mussels with seafood, and really embracing the street food. And I think I did miss lots of the banqueting food, and I wish I have time every night to host banqueting dinners and meet up with friends and try all these exotic dishes. Because one of the things that I enjoy about banqueting Chinese cuisine is the ability to try 15, 20 items, but it's paced throughout 3 hours. So you kind of really enjoy that atmosphere of just taking your time. And of course, you have to enjoy sitting next to that person because you'll be with them for the next 2-3 hours.
Well, lucky if you didn't enjoy their company, you can enjoy the food.
Yes, that's great.
So as a graduate of architecture, town planning and urban design, what brought you into the catering business?
I think going back probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I remember my father, who of course is our family business, when my father started, and have discussion about our interests in terms of our investments in the restaurant trade. And of course, one of the identity I looked at was, well, I enjoy going out drinking, I enjoy bars and food, and of course, I started by embracing and coming into our Western environment, locating our businesses in London, and to engage and learn. But not just about initially understanding the food side, because for a long, long time, I've always been, you could say, a customer, as a consumer, eating our own food. So of course, we'll be a very good critic of understanding what we're eating and enjoying and embracing that. And it's not necessarily something that is particularly new to us, as something that in those who are from Hong Kong are constantly exposing to new style of cooking. And I think the Chinese in general are one of the best brand ambassadors of Chinese food, because the first thing they talk about is enjoying good food and where to go and eat for this, where to go and eat for that.
So does your architecture background give you unique selling points in creating a holistic experience of dining in a built environment?
I think the architecture side, which I do enjoy, is the artistic side of understanding in terms of what kind of the training and the history of architecture, the training that I've taught myself. And one of the key things I've looked at is not just the design elements of, say, the restaurant design or the spatial elements or layout, but one thing that part of my interest was in urban design and master planning, in terms of looking at location, looking at where the best place to open for restaurants, and in terms of looking at new proposed areas and how that potentially could be a gold mine or could be a failure. And I do believe that one of the interesting points I've noted over the years is working with landlords, with the landlords' agents, with their public relationship, to look at ways that we can embrace to promote a locality. And it's important to engage all the consumers or the press to tell them about what's really interesting about you, and hopefully the attraction of the general public, whether they're tourists or local residents or the local businesses, that bring and push an area is by them going into new places and bringing footfall traffic.
Yeah, so what would be the Leong's Legend brand B?
The Leong's Legend brand B in terms of the future, or as in
currently, so the way you say it encompasses an identity and would relate to the customer and also relate to locality.
Yes, indeed. And one of the fascinating things that we always try to experiment is ensuring that when we roll out a selection of Leong's Legend, now we've on our third, that each of them have its own identity. And we constantly try to engage the local public, those who live in the immediate vicinity, to look at what they enjoy eating and ensure that we serve food that is enjoyable for both the tourist, the Chinese community, and also within the tourism that goes into the locality side. And of course, we are constantly looking out for good site. And it was one of the best pleasant surprise we had when we first, our family opened Leong's Legend. And of course, when we open a new idea, we were never sure or certain, is it going to be popular, is it going to be successful? But when we opened the doors and realized, wow, the love of the Chinese, both the mainland Chinese, the Hong Kong Chinese, and the students coming over to find something they can relate to, something they enjoy eating, because it's something that is a flavor that they recognize. And I think one of the key aspects, what we changed in terms of creating the Leong's Legend, this street food atmosphere, not just by promoting a new cuisine title under Taiwanese. There's no mention at the front being a Chinese/Taiwanese. It specifically says Taiwanese. But those who see the menu will recognize it's not just 100% Taiwanese cuisine. Of course, Taiwan itself is a fusion of many dishes that came from China. And we also added many other popular dishes that those who live in London and those who come from tourism aspects of Europe would also see in the menu.
So in some ways, these restaurants with a very distinctive identity still has an appeal to all range of people who might come in.
Yes, I think one of the really significant part of what is really interesting about when Leong's Legend started was that we took away the culture of eating fine dining Chinese food. Is it necessary to have starters, main course, dessert? No, it shows that what we've done in Leong's Legend is to really create a very casual environment where people can come in and order some dumplings, order some freshly made xiaolongbao, and order their dishes without the need to feel, what we order for starters, what we got to order for main course. So you could just come in and order a bowl of dan dan mian, bowl of noodles, and just leave. So you don't have to feel that when you go to a traditional Chinese restaurant and you sit there and you think, am I eating too little? Will the management feel, I'm spending too little? Am I making them being pleased? That is to change that identity of Chinese cuisine to feel, wow, we are creating something totally different, that you no longer need to feel the need to eat too much, but to eat what you enjoy.
So how do you indicate that on the menu or during the dining experience to the new diner that you can order anything you want, as little as you want, as many as you like?
I think it's very clear that, of course, firstly, we started to ensure there's no structure breakdown. So there isn't an area which says starters or main course, and it's just the localers in terms of creating the side dishes, the Leong's Legend specialty dishes, rice and noodle dish, and dim sum. And of course, that already creates a menu where they can see, it's different sections, subsections of dishes, and what we can order. And of course, make people feel very, very comfortable in ordering anything they want, and for their friends to share and for them to enjoy different dishes.
I particularly enjoy the menu you have here in Dumplings Legend, where there's a small section on how to eat the dumpling, the xiaolongbao. So the 3 steps, and I think that's really useful. But how would you explain also to the novice diner in Chinese food, maybe it's their first time, the difference between East Asian cuisines? Because a lot of people would just see the Oriental food and all call it Chinese food.
Yes, I think that the first hurdle, or those people who understand what Chinese food is from Chinatown, and the transition of looking at the regional cuisines in China. And I've been, of course, very aware, and one of my emphasis to a lot of friends and businesses was to educate those, not understanding that, wow, China is actually, we're not eating anything new, but it's 4,000 years of different cultural heritage, different style of cooking that are being exported back now. Is it to London? Or actually, was London Chinatown, when it first arrived in London, was actually serving a lot of very, very traditional heritage food. But the West didn't quite embrace it because they saw, wow, what's this food? I don't really want to eat this, or it's got bones in it. I'm not very familiar with eating dishes with bones because I love to use my knife and fork and I want everything pre-filleted. And I think that questions that's thrown around is very much about how now, if you look at Shanghai, every day 3-4 million of people are there looking for opportunity to do business. But regardless if anything, they found their business partner, found the opportunity, they'll go and eat and enjoy themselves. And so therefore, they are also coming back with knowledge about, wow, I went to these provinces, I tried this, I tried that. It's really fascinating. But of course, if you look at that dynamics now, when we're trying to educate the public about, in Chinatown, we have different cuisine from the Chinese in terms of what we in Dumpling Legend have created, the street food of Southeast Asia. We're trying to embrace all the comfort food from the region. So we understand also the migration pattern of the Chinese over the last 20-30 years, and how you can understand there is the Malaysian Chinese in the community who enjoy their Nyonya cuisine, their curries, their frequent use of different frequent herbs. And you look at the identity of Taiwanese cooking, you look at Sichuanese with the Sichuan pepper, and of course, one of the interesting thing about the misunderstanding, you could say, is that in the 70s, a lot of the public that saw the word Sichuan is just meaning spicy, but doesn't have any reference to the style of the cooking. So, of course, you also have to sway to those public who say, oh, been miseducated, and to get them to really understand, actually, just because it's got a chili doesn't mean it's Sichuanese. So there's a lot of hard work we're all trying to embrace. And one of the key aspects of working with press and journalists is to ensure they try and taste and realize that one of the key dishes, for example, a name that they all share, doesn't mean a kung po chicken in Hong Kong would taste the same as ones from central China or one from Taiwan, because name is just one of the camouflage of understanding what is the actual dish, and it's important for the consumer to taste with an open mind.
So would you be able to tell us a bit more about the features of the representative dishes of Taiwan cuisine?
Yeah, I think the representation, when we first looking at Leong's Legend, looking at what we to present to the public, was to find some really interesting dishes. So we looked at the fundamentals of traveling, and our executive head chef, Michael, went over to Taiwan and investigating all this street food. And I've personally been to many street food outlets and seeing all these families were just focusing on one thing they make, and how to combine a selection of the favorite dishes, talking to Taiwanese, talking to Chinese people, what they haven't found or what they haven't discovered, and to go through dishes such as the 3-cup chicken, which is something which a lot of people don't understand, but there's this romantic usage of the language term. And 3-cup chicken, you could say, is one of these dishes that embraces a very original Chinese way of describing dishes: a cup of soya, a cup of rice vinegar, and a cup of, in terms of what they look at making, combining the ingredients and to make a dish, but simply looking at what is the usage terms. And then of course, when you look at interesting dishes like oarjin, what do we find interesting is an omelette, but egg is a very popular dish, and we feel sometimes would that fit into a restaurant? But we also know that it's part of our hard work to promote it as an identity for Taiwanese, because oarjin, for those who live in Taiwan, they know what it is. For those who doesn't live in Taiwan, will have no clue what oarjin is. But of course, when we try to embrace, to tell customers, oh, this is an omelette, then try to describe to them that it's not just an omelette, it's a very, very different version. It's got seafood, it's got kind of the starchy taste, and all that different flavors. Is sometimes you have to really sell it the best way for you to say, just try it and see if you like it or not. And I think most people, when I talk to you about some of the Taiwanese dishes and looking at why we're looking at some of the specialty dishes, is how we can promote and talk and focus on a few selection. But of course, we looked at one of the key elements, which is xiaolongbao. And this dim sum category, which has been around for London for many years. And of course, we do a full-on dim sum. And we thought, well, for the evenings, a lot of customers feel the need to eat some dumplings. But strategically, many restaurants in London stop doing dim sum because it's not financially viable to sell dim sum in the evening. And therefore, they feel, well, as a tourist and as Chinese, you've always known that you can't go and eat dim sum in the evenings. But when we've seen that actually, could we actually create some dim sum and keep some of the favorites? So we decided to look at xiaolongbao, freshly made xiaolongbao, to ensure that, wow, out of all the category of dim sum, xiaolongbao is quite unique. So keeping that and allowing the customers to order that, and it becomes a very popular evening, almost like a side snack or starters for them to eat before eating the main course.
So would you come up with a range of dinners type dim sums, a bit more filling, a bit more substantial?
And I think that's one thing which really explored in Dumplings Legend. And in Dumplings Legend here in Xiaolongbang, we've looked at what's the identity of a traditional gastronomic Chinese cuisine cooking. And although our family background that started the Zen restaurants, we understand the gastronomic of Chinese eating, the importance of banqueting food. But what we realize is also that as Chinese, it's no different to those coming from the French eating brasserie, eating their coq au vin, or the English eating their, say, the identity of fish and chips or their steak and kidney pies. The Chinese actually have a lot of their favorite comfort food. And one of the ways we try to embrace the comfort food was, well, in Dumpling Legend, how can we try to reflect a menu that encompasses all the comfort street food of the Chinese? So this is one of the key things we looked at doing for the Dumpling Legends menu, to have all the favorite Chinese ethnic dishes, that from the Malaysian curry, which everybody loves, to some of the amazing kind of dim sum, to a lot of different regional cuisine in China, to feel that we can create these dishes. So those who love the dongboi or loving eating pork belly can enjoy eating those dishes. And they can all come and enjoy eating their favorite kind of piece of their comfort food. And that is really fascinating for us to look at, not just reflecting now Chinese food. Is it all for the tourists to try to attract them to eat something? Or is it actually for us, as in those who live in this country and those who do business or come over here, especially the tourism side or the educational side, to eat food that they understand back home?
That's a very big challenge. So would you be able to tell us a little bit more about the Sichuan cuisine, and when did it first arrive in the UK, and how would you describe the features?
Yes, I think Sichuanese cuisine, we've noticed in terms of the radar, that someone opened a few restaurants outside the periphery of Chinatown. And I think probably around 5-6 years ago, there was a lot of discussion and a few journalists were talking about Sichuanese cuisine. And at that time, there was a lot of the understanding of Sichuanese food being just spicy. It's spicy, it's hot. It's almost describing what 20 years ago everyone thought Mexican food is just all chilies. But of course, that's the interesting dynamics, is how somewhere that is in central China, when I looked at the history of China, and that's part of my favorite part, is the research in history, is the cultural identity of Sichuanese food. And if you look at, for example, the use of chilies, which is typically a Mexican use of this chili that was somehow cross-exposed from the whole pan, say, South America route, where did all the kind of chili comes from, and how did it all ended up in China through the exchange of trade, exchange of cultural identity. And of course, there's some subtleties of what's the Sichuan pepper being originated in Sichuan has a very unique flavor, and there's numbing taste that we were talking earlier on about. And then looking at, wow, what is the understanding of oils, embossing in oil? And I've always looked back, well, of course, we all know, not just 4,000 years ago, it's only a few hundred years ago, there was never refrigeration. How do people preserve food? Using stable in terms of ingredients and liquid like oil to emboss and to make sure things actually last and lock in the flavors. So it's the whole history of marinating products and traveling with goods, and makes me also realize that why meat are so popular in the Sichuanese cuisine is also because it's landlocked, there's no sea. If you look at the regional difference of Canton, is very close to the sea. They have the unique identity of trying to eat the flavor of the fresh seafood. Of course, back in Sichuan in the olden days, there wasn't the luxury. But of course, over the years, China has evolved in terms of the availability of transportation and seafood, and of course, a lot of dishes are starting to change. So when I looked at Sichuanese cuisine, you look at a lot of these Sichuan broths, you look at the Sichuan peppercorn, things that are made with them, you are literally having this culinary tour to try, wow, this amazing different type of dishes and cuisines. So I think the best favorites that I always say to people who try to enjoy the first part of Sichuanese food is to order a mixed starter, the hors d'oeuvres of cold starter. And there you try the eggs, the 1,000-year eggs, the kind in terms of the pig ears, and you can try all these different unique items that you wouldn't come across. And then that way you'll be able to try and taste and then experiment. And I think for those who do look at the main courses or eating some of the culinary side of the food side, then some of the lamb skewers is one of my personal favorite, which is flavored with Sichuanese pepper. And along with some of the soju, they're kind of the old historic broths of this chili embossed broth. And just remember, if you can't take your chili, just don't bite into it.
That's a good tip, thank you. So you mentioned about the chili in South America. Would you say the Sichuan pepper is a bit similar to resemble a bit of the jalapeno?
Well, the Sichuan pepper, because pepper is quite a utilized category, the actual pepper is actually a peppercorn. But a lot of journalists or press, when they talk about Sichuan pepper, they don't talk about the Sichuan peppercorn. They kind of lost the corn part. So it looks on the front of it something similar to a black peppercorn, or is it actually a much greener shade? But it's very, very different flavor. And I do think the West has always been embraced in the pepper because it's something they've kind of got used to. And I guess it's the first exposure of the Western Caucasian trying something slightly spicy. But the chili is also an interesting part. It's not the fact that you look at the Sichuanese cuisine, it's playing on the history of chili, but they aren't fresh chili. They are also playing to the whole history that this chili that would have come from South America would have been dried. So hence the restaurant are still keeping that imageries and still using the original techniques of using dry chili, because that would have been what they would have had during the whole Silk Road trading of dry chilies. Until now, you can see the heritage and the identity of the ingredients haven't changed, because people could say, well, actually, why are you still using dry chilies? Why not use fresh chilies? But no, that is the heritage. That is how it's cooked. And you can see this is not a fusion food. This is traditional cuisine that, yes, in a way has evolved the last 3,000 years, but we are still embracing certain elements of the new taste and flavor. But for anyone who's never tried it, all you have to do is really find genuine Sichuanese peppercorn and crush it, and then take a lick or bite, and just feel the sudden explosion of flavor. It's not spicy in the sense of like a chili hotness, but it's sort of got numbing taste, which kind of slightly, it's an anesthetical taste that numbs your palate. But it's amazing because when it does that to your tongue, you get to sense other foods and feel the sensitivity to the flavors, and allows you to taste other things which you haven't tasted prior to eating the peppercorn. So it's definitely a culinary journey for those who've never tried Sichuanese to go to the likes of Empress Sichuan to try some of the Sichuanese cooking there.
So how popular is Sichuan cuisine among the non-Chinese customers in the UK?
Oh, it's actually quite phenomenal. We were very surprised. And one of the journalists, when we first opened, Giles Corran, who writes for the Times magazine, came to our restaurant, and we just stumbled on his review, giving us 9 out of 10 on all 4 categories. And when I discovered, and why is there love or fascination to Sichuanese food, or is it because the Western palate have been very acquiring into eating spicy food? They love their curries, they love their spicy food. And so over the years, they've been kind of acquainted to say, actually, I can eat my spicy. And for those who've never eaten, say, Chinese food, they think, oh, it's just spicy, it's nothing different. It's no different to eating curry, perhaps. So I think it's the understanding that a lot of those who are, say, not Chinese, never tried it before, and first time discovering and go, wow, this is an interesting taste. It's very addictive, it's very new, it's not the same I've eaten, and hence you also bring the followers on top of those who understand the cuisine. But it's no different to someone like myself or those who live in Hong Kong who's never really eaten Chinese food, because when I was young, I've never really exposed to it. We know it exists, but you always go to eat what you actually wanted to eat, as opposed to experimenting and trying new cuisine. So I guess it's not just that the English or those who are tourists who never discover Chinese food, also many Chinese people have never tasted it and never really sat down and tried it. So it's also quite amazing for me to discover food when you've acquired a very knowledgeable basis on eating certain dishes and seeing that wow factor.
So did you have to adjust the recipe? Did you have to adjust the spiciness for the Westerners and perhaps the Chinese customers as well?
Oh, there's no adjusting. One of the interesting points people knew about Chinese cuisine or Chinese cuisine is actually most restaurants, the staff will ask you, how do you like your spiciness? In a way to say, well, if they see you're from, say, overseas and you might walk out of the restaurant, they will say to you, we can actually tone down the flavors. But if you see mainland Chinese coming in, they will probably want to have as hot, as spicy as we can have it. And so the restaurants do adjust accordingly to the flavors, to what the customer's requirement. And it's very much in the same way that what a restaurant would do, we expect it of to our staff is to serve what the customer wants. We aren't here to dictate to them, this is the Chinese food, this is the way it's done, you have to embrace it our way. But we are very flexible, and it's continuing that journey to allow them to try and discover new dishes that they never tried. Because when you look at seeing a restaurant, Chinese on the frontage of a restaurant, the first thing that goes into your mind is, oh, what is this? I don't know what this is. Oh, let's just skip it. I'm going to go to another restaurant that says Chinese restaurant. So we're breaking up this kind of reservations people have about Chinese food. And it's now one of the busiest restaurants in London, serving pretty much Chinese cuisine. And there's only a handful. But if you're looking at Chinatown, we could say in the Chinatown area, we're pretty much the only Chinese restaurant that's serving very, very formal, traditional Chinese food that isn't available elsewhere in a very comfortable setting.
What other regional food will you be bringing into Chinatown and London?
Well, we are looking at a lot of interesting dishes from the likes of Hunan cuisine. I think we looked at things from northern China. We look at how the impact of traditional Chinese cuisine from different regions that we never explored. And also furthermore to look at other new dishes that potentially that we are discovering. And so we've looked at a lot of the street culture of the Hong Kong tea houses as well as part of our understanding and identity.
Would you be able to tell us a bit more about the features of Hong Kong style tea houses?
I think that over the years, many of the first generation that came into London Chinatown have realized that, wow, in Chinatown, it's always been very much a Hong Kong destination, those who live in Hong Kong and come over here. And what I realized is also there are a lot of people that lives in Hong Kong that never eaten, say, the Western style of Chinese food or the Western way of cooking English food, but can't embrace, they know there's something called a steak or there's a steakhouse, but maybe the Western way of doing it is too expensive or they don't like the flavors. And I think it's almost like taking this whole fusion identity of what the Hong Kong Chinese, which has been one of the best example of combination of culture for the last 200-300 years between the West and the East. And they themselves, over these generations, have created fascinating dishes that are very much trapped in Hong Kong. But a lot of people from Hong Kong understand these dishes because they were brought up eating this dish, but yet they never set foot to an expensive Michelin or an expensive gastronomic experience. But their way of gauging Western cuisine is eating this kind of style of Chinese cuisine or this style of Western Chinese cuisine that exists in the form of tea houses.
So would you say the British Chinese food identity is just as much of having Chinese food in Britain as much as British food served for Chinese people.
Well, I do think in terms of those who see London Chinatown, the history of how it's gone through is still a much shorter history than compared to places like Hong Kong, which has such a huge dynamic of relationship with the British and the West, and also with the Chinese culture. And when you look back, that when we're trying to explain what is the classic example of those who first discovered Chinatown, the West, and how those going back 100, 200 years ago, who went all the way to kind of going out to Hong Kong and trying the same new cuisine that they had never tried, and of course not just risking their personal life to go into these kind of charted territories, but to be able to kind of introduce to their counterparts dishes that they would have learned from their hometowns. And you could see the common usage of ingredients, the common usage of beef, the common usage of seafood, to pork. All these dietary usage are very common kind of experimentations. And I guess when you culturally try to adjust or trying to kind of promote your cuisine, if you can't find the sources, then you adapt. You're trying to use this instead of this, use that. So a lot of kind of that whole revolution of food has evolved between the palate and between the style of food. So when I look at things like the London Chinatowns, traditionally people look at sizzling dishes. You look at a beef sizzling dish with onions, but that looks very similar to what you get in a very traditional British steakhouse. The only difference is kind of pre-sliced into smaller dishes for you, or you eat it with a pair of chopsticks, or it's got more of a spicy kick. But do the public know that, or do they see that, oh, it's peppery, it's therefore Chinese? And I think a lot of these questions you ask about, wow, do the West actually are eating more comfortable versions of Chinese food that they feel less conservative about? Or those who are much more adventurous and go, well, I'll just go straight to these interesting dishes because I know what I'm ordering. Because I think when you look at the history of the Chinese and English friends, when the Chinese first introduced food to their Western friends, they're not going to order scary things. They're trying to be polite, they're trying to be generous, and will order things that they believe their friends will enjoy. And hence, you look at the development of a lot of these so-called traditional or Western style Chinese food is actually just a version that has evolved because all their Western friends walk away thinking, right, I had a crispy duck and pancake, this is what I was served, so next time I go to Chinatown or go to a Chinese restaurant, this is what I was taught to eat. So I think this is what my friend said, and that became part of the rumors that over the years they keep coming back and eating the same dishes. And so one of the key questions I have is, do the public actually think of going to a Chinese restaurant because it's a Chinese restaurant, or actually they want to eat A, B, C, D, E, and this is what they're going for? So regardless of what the menu says, they are just to go and eat the dishes that they were first introduced when they first tried Chinese food, and hence everybody is continuing the circle of the, I could say, very conservative range of kind of the experimental Chinese food that developed.
What would you say this common dish would be?
The common dishes.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I do see, well, why is it some of the sweet and sour dishes, why is it some of the stir-fry dishes, crispy duck became very popular? It's because those were the first dishes that you could say some of the Chinese friends introduced to their Western friends. That's the dishes that they recognize and go, oh, that's different, I think I'm safe with that, and I'll order those dishes. And over the years, particularly if you look at a lot of the roast duck and rice, char siu from the southern Cantonese type of representation also became very popular because they can identify with the taste of soya, the sweetness, the roast, the honey. It's actually a combination of ingredients that's been around in Europe for a long time as well.
You mentioned earlier about heritage food, Chinese food. How would you describe that to me?
I think the heritage identity, when I look at the history of how a lot of people talk about Chinese food and looking at, wow, is this Chinese food, or is this modern fusion cuisine Chinese food, or is this traditional Chinese food? And I always try to explain that, yes, the Chinese have always been eating a lot of different style of cuisines over the last 20, 30 years. And I've become very kind of mixed in terms of what our understanding, or do we remember which is a very good dish or which is not a very good dish. And I think that when you look at the history of the heritage sections, is have they disappeared from restaurants? And when I did some research and I looked into, people always commented, I hear a lot of Western always commented, well, in this restaurant, there is only a Chinese menu for the Chinese, and there's a Western English menu for the English. And I hear people think, wow, it's like, oh, the Chinese people are keeping the best thing for themselves and not giving to the Westerners. And when I talk to a lot of chefs, talking a lot of all these people who've been in the industry for a long time, friends and family, and talking to others, and go, why is it that we have menu? And of course, the key thing is that the Chinese, as their primary business, is to promote their food and cooking. And they want to ensure that those who eat Chinese food are ordering Chinese cuisine that they will enjoy. And I think therefore, over the years, what was becoming very obvious is that those who in the Chinese catering business don't really want to serve things that their customers is going to have a very negative time. And so traditionally, yes, all these other very fancy items or scary items that they thought, oh, the Western counterpart, they might not like it, and the last thing we want is for them to order something and didn't like it and send it back and continue to ensure they only order things they want to eat. And so then I went discovering and talking to many of the customers and friends which have this very negative commentary about the Chinese stuff. Then I explained to them it's because a lot of these dishes could have been chicken feet, it could have been a lot of bones and meat that the Western palate at that time, still now, many people want to have that clean taste. They want to bite and chew into meat. They don't want to have to bite into bones or bite into some other things and feel that, oh, what's this in my mouth? I don't like it, and I'll send it back.
So do you think customers are a little more open-minded now, and that they would be braving your sliced pig ears and duck tongues, or do they still stick to traditional safe choices like Peking duck and barbecue spare ribs?
Well, I do think that's what the public like to go. I think a lot of the public who eat Chinese food would be a selection of those who know what dishes they're going for, and they're going to eat just those dishes, and they're not going to order anything else. But I also understand is that what you get is there are a lot of journalists or new kind of cuisines where they say, oh, we want to talk about Chinese food. Can you order all these duck tongue? Can you order 1,000-year eggs? And they actually just, in a way, I find is it annoying that they're trying to present some element of Chinese food as a scary food. It's got all these very, very scary part of dishes and cuisine that no one would touch. So I always find it quite frustrating that there are journalists who want to showcase the really weird and interesting part of Chinese food, but you could say it's trying to make a press statement, trying to show people all these strange little kind of food items the Chinese eat. And so when people ask, well, what's it like eating chicken feet, or what's it like eating this or duck tongue, and telling them that actually duck tongue tastes very similar to escargot. If you do garlic butter version and take say in terms of forget the bone, the texture is very similar. And of course, if you try to identify people like the French who love a lot of gastronomique, love to eat a lot of very, very unique seafood and dishes, they could understand the taste and flavor. So I think it's also down to how well trained as a consumer, what are you going to be thinking of eating, how open-minded you are about eating certain dishes, and make you feel that this is what I want to order.
Yeah, I personally think that a lot of British people are a bit more experimental now, and they have the opportunity to travel to different places, and if they'd gone to China, they probably wouldn't be able to communicate to the restaurant to understand what the food is on the menu. They'd probably just end up pointing at something. Certainly some of my friends had this experience where they were just given some really nice, weird exotic food, but instead of seeing it as scary, I find a lot of Westerners are now seeing them as exotic, and they would actually actively sort them out. Do you find that to be the case? Or?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting point. What I have found is part of the explaining to the public what a dish is. And of course, if you look at traditionally Chinese menu, it's very poetic the way they describe dishes. Everything is almost like a landscape description, almost like a painting. But it's the same as you reading French. If you know that word means something to you, that is what you understand the translation. And so for many Chinese historically reading a Chinese menu, they know what the dish is because they know what that stands for. But for the Western or for those who are new to that style of cuisine, it's very hard to explain in just a sentence what is this dish. And of course, most people just probably don't want to have this frustration of spending 50 minutes with the waitress going through the whole menu, because if you ask a waitress every single item, and most restaurants having hundreds of dishes, it would take a rather long time to go through every single dish. And probably halfway through, they'd probably be too busy that they kind of feel very, very hard to explain. And I think that the consumers, therefore, in a sense, when they read a menu and a restaurant menu, and it's one of the key things we looked at, is how to explain to people. And yes, in one sense, it can be as simple as recommending chef speciality, and that is what you want to promote. For those who've never tried, these are the 6 dishes to go for. And in many of my culinary tours, in discussing with journalists, is to say to them, these are the things to try. If you can try these and enjoy these, then it becomes the easier gap to promote and push your identity to try other cuisine. Because it's always going to be a minefield for those who doesn't understand the language, and even for those who say traveling to China, you look at a dish, you wouldn't know what it is. And if your language barrier is being a problem, like traditionally those from Canton can't speak Mandarin, they go to China, and it's the same issue for those from China going to Hong Kong. They don't understand each other, and it's always a combination of understanding or not understanding. And there's nothing worse in life because of those who order the wrong dish and feel, I don't want to send it back to the kitchen, maybe it's my fault, and eating something that you didn't enjoy. So therefore, are you going to say when you leave a restaurant, oh, I don't like this restaurant, or is it because you ordered things you didn't want to eat? And I've certainly remembered ordering things that I thought this is going to be the way it's done, and actually, I didn't know it's going to be done in this style. And you kind of have a sense of disappointment. And I think if you're going to go to a restaurant and enjoy eating dishes you wanted to go, there will be people that will want to play it safe and will order things that they understand and understand the flavors. And for others, they always say, find a token Chinese in the table. You're from Hong Kong, or you're from China, or you're from Taiwan, you do the ordering. And so the friends, just likewise, if we were in that position, what would you say to our friends? Right, I say, any of them, are you allergic to anything you guys don't eat? And right, anyone don't eat spicy? So you try a mixture of food that try and get everybody to understand. But that is the worst culprit of all. You can have the best Chinese meal in your life, but when you finish your meal, could you remember everything you ate? And that is always the question we always talk about, is how to get people to remember what they ate. And if you try to go back to a restaurant and say, I came last week, had this dish, it's in a circular dish, it's got this in there and that in there, it's almost like gambling to know if they can get it right or not. So I think the best thing of all is to those, likewise, we all now have cameras and digital cameras, take pictures of the dish you enjoy, and many people do. Write down, capture the names, so you remember next time you go back to a restaurant what you ate. And sometimes it's just about keeping the awareness, keeping the copy of the bills, and remember to engage and remember and actively research what you've eaten.
So do you think that would apply to most consumers then?
Well, I certainly do. I think if I had a fantastic bottle of wine or had a fantastic dish, it's definitely my interest to write it down. Because how else are you going to tell your friends about it? Because we're so brand aware of everything that's around us. We want to tell a friend about this new product or this new service or a new holiday destination. We don't just say top of our head, there's this place somewhere, it's really cool, go there. You have to give people names.
So would you make your menu written in such a way that it's quite easy for friends to recommend to other friends, and just like a game of Chinese whispers, more and more details would be lost, the same photo won't be passed down? How would you make it memorable for them so it's easy to pass on that info?
Well, definitely in the same way that we now very much each of our dishes have the name of the dish, so like 3-cup chicken, it's very easy to recognize, and a short description what it is. And all dishes are very much structured in that way. And of course, if you look at both the Chinese and English, the interesting thing about in terms of people remembering, say, dishes now, is to link in terms of what they remember, the name of the dishes and what ingredients they had. And if you look at some category like dim sum, for example, people always know what dim sum is. But of course, behind dim sum, there's so many different dishes, and how do people remember? So there's an interesting also the dynamics now of those. Yes, you get many people who know Mandarin. A lot of Caucasians and Westerners are learning Mandarin for business, for other reasons. But looking at pinyin, it's been a very popular category. And it's the same way as that people now are describing food in terms of what they remembering the names. So dim sum, of course, is a Cantonese take, but it's almost looking at history of words and looking at category like xiu long bao, and we try to change the xiu long bao to make the pronunciation, the spelling of the X, to take it and put it an S, to make it SIU as opposed to the Mandarin version of X, because the public will still see pinyin, oh, it's an X, how to pronounce it. And so we try to, in a way, change some of the caricatures of some of the English pronunciation, but looking at some of the dishes like ha gao, siu mai, which most Cantonese to remember, the prawn dumplings, the pork dumplings, it's becoming phenomenal that many people who know their dishes would order by Chinese name. But I think most Chinese waiters now sometimes do listen and look out for the Westerners who know many of the Chinese dishes and say these in the kind of pinyin version. And they all kind of pleasantly surprised. But it works very, very well. And I think that question goes back to, well, we understand the dishes we're ordering now. They are, some of them, understanding the pinyin. It makes life a lot easier to remember certain category of food.
And how do you think Chinese food has changed since you have arrived in UK?
Well, I think that the exposure of Chinese food is very much a timeline of what your exposure is. And of course, I've eaten a whole selection of food. And I remember when I first arrived, I went up to, I think, Liverpool, probably in my kind of early years. Probably I was around 18 to 20, around the age. And going to Chinese restaurants where you could see they're Chinese, but they were kind of knowing that they don't really serve much, something that's different, or how I remember the experience of eating certain dishes is all just sauce based. So you can have 4 choice, and it's oyster sauce, chili sauce, hoisin sauce, and you kind of feel, oh, this is not my understanding of Chinese food. But you embrace that everyone around was enjoying the dishes because it's something different. So when I talk about how you've been exposed, if you've only eaten 1 meal a week or 1 meal a year, of course, it's very hard to engage what the level and quality. And sometimes I refer this very clearly to friends. The fact that if you've been eating bad Chinese food, or not say necessarily bad, but maybe not true to the heart of the cooking, you would think that is Chinese food. So if you've been eating that for your last 10 years, and I took you to eat this true versions or this proper way, using very authentic ingredients, using really interesting cooking techniques, you go, oh, I don't like this. Because in your mind, it's ingrained into you to feel and taste what this should be. So in your mind, your head is already playing tricks with you. Your brain is already telling you what it should taste like. Once it's in your mouth, you don't like it. Total rejection, because your body's telling you. And that's part of the problems are when I talk to people. It's the same as your mother's cooking is always going to be the best, because you spent 30 years eating it. So of course, people remember that, oh yes, why is our mom's cooking always the best? Because we've been brainwashed. So it's nothing about the fact that are you going to eat something that's open mind. And hence, when we try chefs cooking or we try new dishes, it's important to get people who are from the areas, who know their food, and participate in the culinary tour to taste new things. And that is part of, you could say, is how we try to research, how we try to discover new dishes, how we ensure the consistency of the quality is very, very good. And so now, looking back in hindsight, how we're taking on the new, say, nouveau cuisine or fusion cuisine, one of our restaurants, Goldfish, which we were planning to open in Islington, Angel, mirroring our success of the one we did in Hampstead, which had amazing review. A journalist, Matthew Norman, would write for the likes for the Guardian newspaper, gave 9.95 out of 10. But the difference there is almost kind of, when we wanted to open this restaurant, we met 2 chefs who were Chinese, Malaysian, Singapore Chinese, but they used to kind of cook for all these kind of Shangri-La, Four Seasons hotels. And they themselves, of course, were fed up cooking and told, do this dish, here's a recipe. And many people have talent. But their culinary journey is how they discover their dishes. And we gave them a carte blanche. We went for a tasting, tried their cuisine, go, wow, this is really amazing. This is, you could say it's fusion, but in a way it's saying it's modern Chinese. In the same way that when Nobu first opened 10 years ago, they didn't call themselves as modern Latin American Japanese restaurant. They just called themselves Japanese. So a lot of Japanese ate to go, I've never seen sashimi. It's like soaking with all these weird looking sauce. But that's how people's evolved, the texture and taste. And I think it's important to ensure that consumers have a lot of choice, because there are now a lot of different ways of cooking certain cuisine. And people are always fighting to say, oh, mine's more original, or mine's more authentic, or mine's actually better. And I think it's important to reflect both those who are searching, the really good places that they enjoy the flavors, and to really have a good environment, and ultimately your friends and family when you have this meal.
How do you think what's available on the actual market, how has it changed over the last 20, 30 years in terms of the food they provide and also in terms of the dining environment?
A lot of things have changed if you look at what's changed in terms of London as a whole. And I think traditionally Chinese food, my recollection of Chinese food is very biased, because we used to go to our family restaurants, Zen, and my memories was eating lots of gastronomic food, eating a lot of very great dishes, lots of seafood. And we all know these are all the really best of the best. Of course, if you're eating with the owners, they will be serving you very good food and serving you very unique dishes that the chef just caught and tried. And I think when I looked at now, in terms of you look at the market condition, it's a very competitive environment. And if your food isn't good enough, then you will not survive. It's very clear cut. But it's also that in terms of how the public has perceived Chinese food, it's not about them just reading in a book or reading a newspaper. Online exposure is very important. People see a lot of reviews. But of course, in the same instance, if some readers who doesn't understand the flavor would have a terrible meal, would write something terrible. But doesn't mean that it's a terrible restaurant or dish. It's just for that person, it didn't just quite work out. And I think one of the reasons when you look at how a lot of the aspirational figures are promoting Chinese food, we can't lacking many of these caricatures, because the inspiration that the Western chef has about being, I want to be the best Michelin star, they actually all chase to be great French chefs. It's because, is it the technicality of French cooking, or is the uniqueness of the exposure? And if you look at all the French gastronomic restaurants in this country, are all, you could say, English. But how many people are chasing, you could say, the Chinese, wanting to be great Chinese chefs? You get a few token Westerners also doing Chinese food and doing it very well. But is it actually they are also just doing the Japanese versions or more the Pan-Asian cuisine? Or is it truly Chinese? And so when I looked at a lot of the restaurants that are around, many people look at the ambience and look at the environment. As a Chinese, I think historically, people in China pay to join these dining clubs. The decor doesn't look amazing, but they all go for the food. And most Chinese people know, and they do, in their hearts, only go and eat the food. They don't really care that much about if this place has got this great designer that made it happen. Because if you can eat that same dish in another environment, but it will cost you more, you go and say, well, is it worth to pay more for it? And so I think the Chinese have always been more savvy. They look at what they can get for what they pay. I think the Western side is relatively different in terms of those who chase the design. It's not because it's glamorous, it's beautiful, but we also realize in a very metropolitan place in London, many people have a lot of business lunches and dinners. And so if you're selling an advert to a large business, to suppliers, then you needed to sell them the same visuals to what your brand is about. So if you specialize high-end jewelry, then of course you ultimately want to appeal to the same category of your aspirational customers. So you want to be related more to the 5-star environment than being a 2-star environment. So that comparison is something that I draw very closely, that for just looking at who makes the decision for the officers and businesses to book for the lunch and dinner, and you realize that is the PA, is the secretary who'd never been to these restaurants, but just stumbled upon some press release that says, oh, you must try this, it's great. Oh, let's book our boss in. But why isn't the boss himself making the decision? Because he is very much the one that's eating the dishes. So now you see the two waves of the very much the restaurants that have a beautiful decor and design, and often they have to compensate for the cost by charging a lot more for the customers. So if you look at our value, look at what we sell, freshly made silong bao, starting 8 dumplings for £6. Where in London can you find that price point? Definitely not. And we've seen a lot of brands that started off doing very good value, and over the last 2-3 years they've all shot up in prices. It's because many of them initially when open they do try to appeal to the mass public, but many of them strategically cost to go up. And so I think now in Chinatown, when you focus on what is Chinatown stand for, people historically think Chinatown is about just good value cheap. But this is one of the prime real estate in London. The rents and rates and everything in this area is by far one of the highest in all across the capital. But also it's becoming a very niche locality. People come to Chinatown. It's this romanticism of, oh, Chinatown, coming in here and realizing that this is very different. I didn't live in Chinatown, and the first time I came to Chinatown with my kid, and she was maybe, I think, 2.5, her eyes looked around like, wow. And of course, before she was born, we lived outside Chinatown, there's not that many Chinese people. And she just realized that, wow, there's more than just one daddy. And it's quite amazing to see kind of this kind of escapism. When I mention my love of Chinatown, it's almost like you want to go on holiday, but walking through Chinatown or walking through, say, Shaftesbury Avenue, it's very different dynamics. You kind of feel you've just gone to the Far East for that 5 minutes diversion. And I think a lot of people don't realize, you can't take it for granted, oh yes, there's a lot of Chinese people here. But when you look deeper, there's so many good services. It's not just the restaurants, there's the lawyers, and there's loads of different designers, hairdressers, and they're offering probably the best service at extremely good value. So there's the importance of value in Chinatown, and also the importance that now, over the years, the combination of tourists, combination of students from mainland China, who have all come from different parts of China, or wanting to eat food that they can relate to, are now coming in droves to try restaurants. And if they discover a taste which they enjoy, then they're bound to come back, because many of the Chinese restaurants that are serving, say, maybe traditional Chinese food are very much distant to what they understand as what Chinese food in their eyes is.
How do you see Chinese food in the UK in 20, 50 years' time?
What, 20, 30 years' time? Of course, it's always very hard to speculate, but depending on how relaxed or how well tough the immigration issues is going to be. Because of course, the immigrations or the students coming in now are students who want to have the opportunity to study. Once they finish the study and education, if they're not allowed to stay, then they're going to go back home. So for them, they're exporting an element of their Western culture, but they're taking with them, yes, in a way, the love of Chinese cuisines and food, but probably not long enough to really make a huge impact for the kind of the mass migration of people coming in and out of the country. But for the British, one thing is amazing, and a lot of people have discussed, is that more and more people now are going and traveling to Southeast Asia. You could say flights have become more value in terms of better value to go on holiday in overseas, but also the fact that a lot more people now are doing business with China. And in many of the kind of relationships we discussed, if you need to go to China and you need to do business, of course you have to ensure you can survive eating the food. So many people have now starting to look closely at what they need to learn, the Mandarin, the Cantonese, understanding about food etiquette, understanding how to behave, how to kind of have all the tips. And many of them are now choosing to kind of enjoying the Chinese food and seeing and changing. But one of the negative aspects I have about Chinese, or what is going to be revolutionary, difficult to kind of in terms of understanding, is that now people serve, say, many Pan-Asian food, and many of them are under this Pan-Asian fusion cuisine. So my concern is that in 20 years' time, would people be able to tell by looking at a dish, is this a Japanese food? Is this Chinese food? Is this Thai food? Is this Malaysian food? Because my concern is they all become very mixed, and it's almost kind of this in a pretty beautiful porcelain plate. Oh, it looks very Japanese. Oh, with a big mess, then maybe that looks very Chinese, because that's what the public are engaging at the moment. And I think that's a concern I have about Pan-Asian cuisine. And many of the restaurants that we have, for example, in Chinatown, Ikusan, started as a Japanese restaurant. We kept a very distinctive 3-tier of cooking. We have the dim sums, we have the Thai kitchen, we have the Japanese cuisine. But in there isn't a mix of, there isn't a Thai fish tempura. No, they're all very much segregated, doing the traditional food. And that is part of our history. When we first opened our first restaurants, being the Japanese, we went to many Japanese restaurants where they only serve, say, sushi. It's not because they couldn't cook other things. It's because in Japan, chefs are trained to do one skill. Hence, you have to go to a tempura bar, do tempura, go to a sushi bar, do sushi, and a grill bar, do grill food. And what we try and do is cross-train everyone. But to cross-train, we rely on the skills of our chef, the head chef, working very closely with suppliers and educating them to use the ingredients which are relevant to the product we serve. And that is very important. They're trying to create very original recipes. And many of our restaurants now, especially Japanese, we have an A to Z of traditional Japanese food. You want your bento box, your donburi, but we also have fusion cuisine. So we have a large choice, so people can try and get to realize, oh, so this is traditional and this is modern nouveau cuisine. Because what is traditional or what is modern today is actually, in tomorrow's term, it's going to be probably traditional food. So we're always playing around how the interest changed, how embracing not just what the UK identity with China, but look at the classic example of how America has always been seen as maybe 5 years advanced, and the likes of these Japanese California roll. Yes, they came from California, but why is it called California roll? Or what's real different? It's because instead of having the rice, the nori paper on the outside, they had the rice on the outside. So it's very different, the texture, the taste. So it's always kind of re-educating the public, and those who travel well do understand different cuisine. And of course, when I came back from San Francisco last year, and I was so disappointed with the food in Chinatown in San Francisco, I was going, why? Gosh, it's like a lot of people talk about how great food is. So I think different regions is going up and down, and I'm sure some parts, because if there isn't a generation of those who are passionate about food, not going to continue the business, it's not going to get much improvement. But so hence, I've always looked at London Chinatown. It's probably ultimately one of the best places to go and eat Chinese food this time of Europe.
So as the owner of a group of restaurants, would you be driving your restaurant and recipes toward more authentic food rather than the fusion?
And we are actually driving in all aspects, but majority of them are very much traditional food. And we see the traditional cooking is a very important part of the identity of what the food they go for. I guess in one sense is that we've been offering so much choice. It's very hard for us to suddenly decide, oh, now we're giving you so much choice, let's cut back the choices. And I think that is one of the difficulty when balancing, is the fact that, well, us eating out is also, as a consumer, enjoying our cuisine. I have to feel comfortable going to our restaurants and eating. And one of the key things in terms of looking at the approach of, yes, fusion or traditional, we are constantly watching the trends. But one of the things that in terms of our group of restaurants, we have our family of ownership, is also our reliance of our great head chefs. In the sense that each chef, if you look at cooking certain dishes, they might have different recipes and style. We aren't telling them this is right or this is wrong. The guidance on good quality, the guidance of cost, management, hygiene, all this is fundamentally important. But ultimately, if you compare many of our restaurants, say the Japanese that are doing similar cuisines, dishes, not all of them may be exactly the same. Because we understand if we employ a chef that worked in different restaurants from Hong Kong, Japan, and another set of chefs come from different regional background, they all can cook very, very well, but the flavors might change. But it's important to give the chef their ability to also enjoy the profession. And one of the negative aspects I see how the professionals change in the sole restaurateur, how they're running, is that they're all making everything monotonous. And it's not just the shops are becoming high street, those who can afford the rent, and it's also the growth of high street restaurants, replication of them, all of them, same menu, same price. Our high sushi Hampstead costs 20-30% more than the one in Golders Green, one stop away on the Northern Line. But rent in Hampstead costs a lot more. So we reflect that. So you live in Hampstead, unfortunately you pay more, but you do choose to live in a more expensive area. But it's not because we are charging more, it's because everything costs more for us. So we try and balance everything accordingly. But the most important thing is allow chefs to develop And we give a lot of autonomy to our chefs to be able to develop it and to give them guidance how to cook and enjoy, and take them to events, take them to showcases, ways that we try and promote our food in events we do. Likewise, we did the Chelsea Flower Show recently with Leong Perry Champagne, promoting Japanese food. Every week we have events cross culture, developing palates to ensure they try new things and enjoy what they're eating as well.
What do you think of MSG?
MSG is an interesting aspect. I think when people look at monosodium glutamate and realizing that, oh, what is this kind of fancy words? And a lot of people don't realize it's a naturally derived product. It's actually come from soybean. But the whole issue I think people have is just because it's made from, maybe it's a stimulant. And as I understand, it's kind of actively kind of make you taste better because it kind of stimulates your palate. And a lot of people don't like the idea of natural kind of things to stimulate. It's the same as coffee or other things that stimulate your nerves to make something taste better. But in the same way that people look at things like Parmesan cheese, it's one of the highest in terms of naturally ingredients of MSG. And I think going back to some of the cookbook, I remember picking up in the 70s this Hong Kong gas company cookbook. One way that the Hong Kong gas company tried to do to promote people using gas was to give out this amazing cookbook showing them how to cook. And all these recipes, it did have MSG. But it's one of these buzzwords that people feel, oh, it's not natural, but it is natural. There are people that don't misunderstand, but it's a flavor enhancer. And it's something that exists in all aspects of food, and we just can't see or it's being labeled properly. And the classic example is how now it's kind of being camouflaged and disappeared into E number. It's actually now disguised as an E number. So in back of many packages, you can't see MSG, but it's an E number, and also in other terms like yeast extracts, flavor enhancers. But I think it's all down to what you perceive your taste, because if the Chinese has been eating it for many, many years, they've acquired the sensitivity to it. And of course, it's about adjusting to ensure you don't eat too much of anything. So I think a lot of people do look at it. But for us, if you look at for my own identity, for the last 30 years we've been eating it since we're in Hong Kong, and then you realize that actually you can taste the difference. But if you don't have it, without it, it's also a very different taste experience as well.
And lastly, do you have any interesting experiences or stories from your background in catering you can share with us?
Oh, stories-wise, wow, this is a quite interesting side. And I think the story of the journey of traveling, I think one of the great kind of understanding is the share of culture. I think most people do realize that when we try and talk about our cultural identity, the Chinese have a great way to express that through eating and showing people, wow, the love of art, the love of cooking, and the unification of friends and family together to get everybody into one table to enjoy great food and drinks. And I think so many stories, I don't know where to start in terms of the history of our love for food and drinks business.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much for all your stories.
No, thanks, yes.
With us.
Yes. I hope I try and encapsulate some of the issues and
Yeah.
tell you a lot more in depth about certain things as well.